When working with lights in Lightwave, you can use a light to light up the scene, but you won't actually see the light, the actual light source. If I go to camera view, and I'm just going to rotate up towards the light and hit F9, and we don't actually see the light. It could be lighting objects in the scene, but I'm not seeing it. Okay, I'm going to rotate a little off screen, and what we can do is we can turn lights into volumetric lights. Okay, and we see this all the time in everyday life. If you have a smoky room and you can see the beam of light, and basically what it does is volumetric lights will give volume, physical volume to the light. So let's go over to the light properties panel, and where we see volumetric lighting, when I activate that, let's see in the perspective view, we can actually see what the volume of the light is going to be in OpenGL. We've got this display here. Now if I just do a render, we're actually seeing the light. I don't have anything in the scene other than the camera and the light, and I can actually see the light in the scene. Okay, that's just by using the default settings for volumetric lighting. Okay, so what I thought we could do is explore some of the setup and options for volumetric light, and see how we can put it to use. So I'm going to clear this scene. I'm going to hop over to Modeler, and let's just create some text. Okay. I'm going to extrude that out, center it, so we've got some 3D text here. I'm going to save it, Lightwave logo 001, and send it over to layout. Okay, so we have our light here. I'm going to change the distant light to a spotlight. Okay, we see the rays coming out. That allows us to change the cone angle and kind of get a visual representation of what it's going to be like. But we won't actually see the rays, but we can if we use volumetric light. So I'm just going to position my light a little bit. It would even help if I went into the light view, which is 5 on the keyboard. Okay. And come back here. If I do a render, well, I'm seeing light affect the object, but I'm not seeing the light. So I'm going to go over to Light, Properties, turn on Volumetric, and now I can actually see the light. Now if I really want to dress this up, what I'll do is I'll come over to Shadows, Shadow Type, and choose Shadow Map. Okay, go into Volumetric Light Options, and I'm going to turn on Opacity Cast Shadows. And now we can see that we've got the light rays, but when it hits the object, it's going to cast a shadow, which is going to break up the light pattern there. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll set up just a quick little setup, but I like adjusting my my volumetric light properties without having to keep doing an F9. So I'm going to close this, keep this open, go over to Render, Viper, okay, and that way we don't have to keep rendering. I want to change some of my settings. I'm going to take my luminosity and I'm just going to crank it up. I'm going to do redshift, let's do 60, and I'm just going to adjust the attenuation a little bit. Okay, so let's just go with this. I'm going to go ahead and set up a little animation. So I'll go to the top view, zoom out a little bit. See, we can see the actual volume in OpenGL. I'm going to set the light back here. Just make sure I like what's going on there. I'm actually going to lower it some, rotate it up, go back to my top view. On frame 0, I'm going to rotate off here, and on frame 60, I'm going to rotate off here. So the basic animation is that there's no volumetric light on it. shines across, and then there's no volumetric light. So I'll go to my camera view. Let's take a look. If I open up Viper, and if I go to my light, properties, volumetric, we could just do some quick tests. Now if we want to see what it's going to look like, a little preview animation, we can make preview, and it's going frame by frame, just showing where the light is. Now we're not seeing the object, but I can at least see my light properties without having to do full-blown renders. It's already on frame 30. So I use this all the time, especially when we start getting into applying textures to the volumetric light. You're definitely going to want to take advantage of Viper so that you can not waste a lot of time doing rendering. Okay, so now that I have that, I can see the way my little floodlight here is going, my little spotlight is going to work. Okay, I'll just free that preview, and let's go to say frame 45, do a render. See, we can see the streaks coming off the letters. There we go. See the streaks right here and right here. So it's like we put a giant floodlight behind, or a giant spotlight behind our letters, and we're actually able to actually see the streaks off of that. Okay, so that's a quick look at using volumetric lights on a spotlight and having it interact with an object. But we can do a whole lot more with volumetric light. So what I'm going to do is close this down. I'm just going to clear the scene, and let's go see where our distant light is. So I'm just going to move my camera, do something like this. Okay, and I'm going to take my distant light, P for properties, volumetric. Let's open up Viper. There's our distant volumetric light, and I want to start playing with some textures. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit Texture, and let's use a procedural. And I'm going to try ripples, because that's something, that's a volumetric that's a procedural texture that will animate. Okay, so if I were to go to frame 10 and do a render, we can see that those lines are shifting. Okay, I'm going to change my color to white. Actually, I'm going to change it to a lower value so I can get these rings. Okay, and if I were to just start a little preview, make preview, see, we can see that they're moving. I'm not going to go all the way through. I just wanted you to see that they're actually going to be moving, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to free the preview, but I want to add some color to this. So I'm just going to add another layer, and I'm going to add a gradient, and I'm going to have the input parameter affect previous layer. Usually when you work with gradients, always by default the input parameter is previous layer, and usually that doesn't mean anything if there's nothing underneath the layer. But we are going to actually take advantage of previous layer this time, and I'm going to grab some quick RGB values, and every once in a while I'm going to drop it to black. Okay, so we're getting some nice little gaps there, and then I'm going to pick back up with a color, drop it back to black. Okay, maybe even grab and go really bright with this first one. Okay, so we do something like this. Come over to luminosity, go a little brighter, maybe throw a little red shift in there. Okay, and that works for me. And now I'm going to do my preview, and we can see that it's almost like some kind of sci-fi tractor beam. They're gonna abduct somebody with this. So with just a simple procedural texture applied to the volumetric light and a gradient so we can get some nice color, we've now got this little beam that's shooting down. Okay, and we could control the look of it however we want using procedural textures, and of course by changing some of our values here. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause that, free preview. And let's take a look at if we wanted to use a point light with volumetric light. So I'm going to take this light right here and go to light properties, change it to a point light. Okay, and now we've got, you can see the fall off, the volumetric fall off right here. We've got this ring. Now what you can do is go in and say texture only, so that it's kind of like a hypervoxel in sprite mode. But I'm going to go over to edit texture and change this to say maybe turbulence. Okay, and I'm going to size this up. I think you kind of see where this is going. Now we've got some kind of explosion, or if we size it down a little bit so that we can see, you could make all kind of nebulas and space backdrops with these, but you can also use these along with explosions. You've got the intensity in the center. That, of course, that's where the light is, and then it can fade off. So this is just, and that's using texture only, so it renders pretty fast. You can also do sprite mode, which of course gives you a completely different look, and it'll render even faster because it's just a sprite. Okay, so it's just a 2D sprite. So there's all sorts of options that we can play with when it comes to, see, we don't even need this render. We could just update the Viper almost in real time. So that's using the volumetric in texture only in sprite mode for on a spotlight. Sorry, on a point light. Now, what we can also do is go over to Windows Presets, and we've got all sorts of presets that we can work with and explore. So if you're working with a point light and you want to go to the default point light volumetric setup, just double click and it'll add those settings, and there you go. Or we can choose the point light presets, and we've got some pretty cool setups that we can work with. Okay, so we've got explosion, electricity, electricity 2, supernova. We got these little plasma blobs, and you can always, there's one of them right there. We got to size it up. We can always add to this once we have settings that we like. We can always add to it and keep a nice collection of presets. So that's if we're working with point lights. If we switch over to, say, a distant light, and we switch to distant light setups, we've got some to choose from here. So that's kind of like that little tractor beam we were looking at. We got neon plasma, we got plasma fire. If we switch over to a spotlight, we can take a look at the spotlight presets and see what we can do there. And again, you can always add to these if you wish. So again, this is a quick look at how we can actually see light using volumetric light. There's a couple other things that we should probably investigate. Let's say that we do like our setup here, and we want to do a render. So I do a render, and I go, wow, that looks great. This is going to be so good whenever I go to comp this. And I go to alpha, and it's not in the alpha. Okay. If I load up an object and have the object in the scene, well, we'd see the object in the alpha, but we're not seeing the volumetric light. Well, there's one thing that we can do to work with that. And if we go over to Control F8 to go to the Processing tab, we can add flare to alpha. Okay. And by working with flare to alpha, when we do our render, we can actually see the volumetrics in the alpha. Okay. Now it also works with if we had, let's grab, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to grab a light. I'm going to add a point light. Move it over here. Go to Item Properties, Lens Flares. Do a render. So we've got a lens flare and a volumetric light, and I'm not seeing that in my alpha, but all I have to do is add flare to alpha, and I'm seeing both in my in my alpha. So if you plan on doing any kind of compositing work or any kind of post work, and you want to take advantage of the volumetrics and the lens flares in your alpha, you need to add flare to alpha to your to the add image filter in order for it to work. Let's take a look at one more thing, and then we'll wrap. I'm going to go ahead and clear the scene, and I'm going to add a spotlight. Rotate it up, put it about right here. If I do a render, of course, we don't actually see the light, but if I go to Light, Properties, Volumetric, we see the light. Now, I'm going to back the camera up a bit, just so we can get a better look at this. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, yeah, I could use volumetric light and be able to see the light, but I think I can also fake the volumetric light. And sometimes you might want to fake the volumetric light because of render time. If you don't have any objects passing through your volumetric light, there's no reason why you actually need to use a volumetric light, and you could speed up render time in a lot of cases working with actual geometry. So let's just take a quick look at that. I'm going to take that volumetric light and just turn it off. Okay, head over to Modeler, and well, I'm looking at this shape and I'm thinking, I think I know that I can make that fairly fast. So I'm just going to go over to Cone, and rotate it, center it, drop it right on the 0. I'm going to get rid of the top here, and I'm going to go and give this a name, Light. Go ahead and give it a color. Okay, and I'm going to send this over to Layout. I can get rid of the logo and just go with the light. Now if I just render this, it's like, well, I'm not really buying that that's a volumetric light. But if I come over to my surface editor, let me just slide this off to the side. If I come over to my surface editor, go to Light, Transparency, and add a gradient, and I'm just going to set it to distance to pivot. Let's do Y distance to pivot. Okay, and I'm going to say, let's take a look at the size of this light. So Control E for the measure tool. It's about 4 meters. That's good to know. So I can change my gradient to 4 meters. And when it's really close to the pivot where the light's supposed to be coming from, I don't want that to be transparent. So that's 0. And as it gets farther away, I want it to get more transparent. Okay, so we'll use texture. And you can see it's starting to fade off. If I add some luminosity, I can play with the color a little bit. We can start to get a bright value down here, and we can actually put a light in here, which the spotlight, and match the cone angle, and then have it fade off. And from a distance, we've got a volumetric light. As long as things don't have to pass through this light, it's the same as having our volumetric light. You want to add textures to it? No problem. We know how to texture. We can add all kind of procedural textures and dress this up as well. If we want, even in the transparency, we can throw like a fractal pattern, and it'll be like the light is in a smoky room. We've been doing this fake volumetric light setup for years, even before we had actual volumetric lights, and we shouldn't discount it just because now we have volumetric lights. There's going to be a time where your scene gets really crazy and you need some little spotlights in the distance, and there's really no reason to use a volumetric light if you can get away with simple little geometry for that. So again, this is just a quick look at, if we want to, I'm going to just slide this off to the side. If we want this light to show up, we just go to Light, Properties, Volumetrics, and there we go. And remember that if we want, we can always go over to the volumetric light options to to dress up our volumetric light to be more than just this white light that is shining up, or whatever color light we're working with. So if you're looking to add physical volume to your light, to actually see the light beams, you'll want to take advantage of volumetric lights.